It's being reported that as early as tomorrow, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is going to authorize the third dose, the booster dose for kids 5 to 11. It's a bold regulatory move under the auspices of EUA, and it's going to be that third dose. And this led me to start to think, which is, what is going to be the further reduction in severe disease or hospitalization from that third dose for kids in this age group? Because we know that kids in this age group already have very, very good odds against SARS-CoV-2. Their odds are really good. I think on my Substack many months ago, I reviewed a paper from Germany about how well kids did against COVID-19 in the absence of vaccination. And the answer was the rates of severe disease, hospitalization, MIS-C were very, very low. It's likely fallen a little bit further with Omicron. And I started to think about the third dose. And in my mind, I think it is difficult to understand how the US FDA justifies the use of EUA, the emergency use authorization, and not BLA, biological licensing agreement, for the third dose, because it's hard to justify and say that there's an emergency for kids 5 to 11 who've already had 2 doses, so much so that we need to lower the regulatory standard for that third shot. I think that's an uphill battle as a regulatory expert, but we will see. We will see what the advisory committees think about this. But as I started to think about this topic, I started to go down the rabbit hole, which is, how do we really know that the first 2 doses of the vaccine in 5 to 11-year-olds reduces the risk of severe disease or hospitalization? So I put out a call on Twitter, send me your best paper, send me the paper that you think proves this, and let's take a look. Candidate number 1. That's what I'm going to talk about in this video. Candidate number 1. It's BNT162b2, Protection Against the Omicron Variant in Children and Adolescents. It's a New England Journal of Medicine paper. And I think it's important to talk about this paper because it illustrates sort of one of the paradoxes in this space. Now, of course, if you wanted to do the gold standard study, it would be very simple. You randomize 250,000 kids to vaccine or no vaccine. By the way, once upon a time, we actually did studies of this size for the Salk polio vaccine. You randomize that many kids, vaccine or no vaccine. You follow them out and see, do I reduce severe disease or hospitalization? Easy peasy. And that's what you would do in a perfect world. Well, there are lots of reasons why people don't want to do that. One of those reasons is that they want to expedite the products to market. I'm not necessarily sold that not doing these studies expedites the products to market, because the appetite to enroll in these studies is tremendous, and it would enroll very, very quickly. Another reason they may not want to do it is they think they might not win, and the other reason they may not want to do it is it's expensive. So those are reasons I think are probably more prescient, more likely to weigh on their mind. Let's talk about this paper. This is a test-negative case control study. That means what they're going to do is we're going to take a bunch of kids who are hospitalized with COVID-19. We think they're hospitalized with COVID-19 because they have the signs and symptoms of COVID-19, and often they have a PCR test positive for COVID-19. We're going to take a bunch of kids hospitalized without COVID-19. They're hospitalized, but it ain't for COVID-19. They're testing negative for COVID-19. And then we're going to ask, what were the odds of antecedent vaccine exposure in the group that was hospitalized with COVID-19? And what was the odds of antecedent vaccine exposure in the group hospitalized without COVID-19? Now, one notable finding in this paper is that there are some kids who are hospitalized with COVID-19 that were in fact vaccinated. So as well as this vaccine works, can't possibly be a parachute because, it's not a foolproof thing. It's not 99.9999%. There's some breakthrough rate. That's to be expected, sure. But what about the rates of vaccination in the group of kids who are hospitalized for a different reason than COVID-19? And they're actually a lot higher. And that creates the odds ratio of the paper. That creates the finding that the odds of being vaccinated are higher if you're hospitalized for a different reason than COVID-19 than the odds of being vaccinated if you're hospitalized with COVID-19. But the moment I first read this paper, my first thought was that I can think of a potential bias here, which is that kids who are hospitalized without COVID-19, they're hospitalized for another reason, includes a group of kids who, unfortunately, suffer from chronic medical conditions, are chronically ill. Not only that, their doctors may expect them to be hospitalized in the future. Unfortunately, these children may suffer from conditions that relapse and remit, that come and go, that lead to subsequent hospitalizations. They may be sicker, more vulnerable, and they may also be more likely to be hospitalized. Now, in that group of kids, you got to think that the doctors, the moment the vaccine becomes available, that's the first group they're going to target. These are kids with comorbidities. These are kids who are vulnerable. You're going to want to vaccinate that group. And so they're going to have a higher vaccination rate. Even if the vaccine is not the thing responsible for reduced hospitalizations, they're going to have a higher vaccination rate because they're the ones in whom vaccination is applied most readily. And that to me is a problem with this study. And if it doesn't make sense, let me give you another example. Many years ago, there was a study of people in the hospital with pancreas cancer and people in the hospital without pancreas cancer. And they said, well, if you're in the hospital with pancreas cancer, how much coffee did you drink before? And if you're hospital without pancreas cancer, how much coffee did you drink before? And it turns out if you're hospitalized without pancreas cancer, you drink less coffee than if you're hospitalized with pancreas cancer. Lo and behold, coffee causes pancreas cancer. That was the message. But the problem with that study was the type of person who was hospitalized without pancreas cancer might be somebody who's chronically ill. They have other medical problems. And those other medical problems are the kinds of thing that prevent them from drinking caffeine. They're not sort of a healthy person who seeks coffee in the same way. And if you use a control of people not hospitalized for a different reason, but of average healthy people, this effect vanishes, and actually coffee is no longer linked to pancreas cancer. What's my point? My point is that this test-negative case control design, because the control are people hospitalized for another reason, and in whom there is got to be a lot of kids that you suspected they might be hospitalized down the road, you're not just testing the effect of vaccination, you're also testing the desire among physicians to vaccinate the type of kid who's going to be repeatedly hospitalized. And you can't separate those two. So I don't know that they have a higher vaccine rate, and that's the thing that's protecting them from getting COVID-19, which is what they want you to believe. Or they have a higher vaccination rate because the doctors were so worried that they're going to be back here in the hospital again or be hospitalized again in the future, that they're the ones I'd want to vaccinate first because the doctor believes that vaccination is going to lower severe disease or hospitalization. And I cannot tease those two things apart. So this study, although it's in the New England Journal of Medicine, it is not persuasive on the question. I think this is what people forget about reading and interpreting medical evidence. This study does not persuade you more because it has this structural problem. I don't see a way around this problem. And in fact, I think if people keep sending me articles to read, I'll read the other articles. But I really think it's going to be very difficult for somebody to show me a credible post-market observational study that vaccination in this age group lowers severe disease or hospitalizations for a few reasons. One, as in this case control design, the kids who are hospitalized for a different reason are probably disproportionately vaccinated. And in the other type of design, the types of kids in whom the parents seek vaccination rapidly are the kids who are most shielded from COVID-19 because the parents are otherwise concerned, and they also are likely to be higher socioeconomic status and more likely to be of certain races, white and Asian, because that's what all the data has shown to date. And those other socioeconomic factors may be protecting them from bad outcomes and not the vaccination itself. And I think so it'll be very difficult to untangle the confounding, and in this particular case to worry about, to think about this sort of case control flaw. And so I'm very skeptical that they'll be able to marshal such evidence. What was the right answer? The right answer was simple. The right answer was staring you in the face, which is just like the Salk polio vaccine, to run that mega randomized control trial of hundreds of thousands of people. That was always the right answer. It's not a secret answer. It's an obvious answer. And that might have been what we would have had if we didn't have the resignation of Gruber and Krauss. It might have been what we would have had if we had a culture of medicine committed to evidence-based medicine, which I think we don't have anymore. That culture is dying. It's on the ropes. Because all of the things that threaten evidence-based medicine are real social forces, like the desire to sell product and to push your product. So I cannot conclude from this paper that vaccination does not prevent severe disease or hospitalization. That would be an incorrect conclusion. But I don't think this paper is persuasive in and of itself that vaccination does. And I continue to encourage people to submit different papers so I can take a critical look at it. The core problem of this paper is that the cases are people hospitalized with COVID-19, which has some vaccination rate, sure. And those are the kids hospitalized with COVID-19. The controls are patients hospitalized for a different reason, and they have a much higher rate of vaccination. But I don't know if that high rate of vaccination prevented them from being hospitalized with COVID-19 or if they were being vaccinated at a higher rate because doctors knew and felt that they were very likely to be hospitalized for a different reason. And that's the kind of kid you'd want to target right away for a vaccination campaign. That's the kid you're most worried about. And that's the structural problem of this paper. So this is sort of a technical look at case control papers, which is something that I don't often talk about because case control papers as a general genre are not that persuasive of biomedical causal claims. I think they are persuasive more of risk factor epidemiology, but for the efficacy of drug products, I think we typically don't use case control studies. We typically don't need to. The mere fact we're doing tells you that the outcome we're worried about, severe disease or hospitalization, is a rare event. That's part of why we're doing a case control study design, and it is in fact a rare event. It is a quite rare event. And that's why we're doing this. But that also tells you that the absolute risk reduction of the product at best has got to be quite modest. So why do I say all this? As we are on the cusp of the third dose, we have to ask ourselves, what is the evidence for the first two? And is it robust? And if you really have a healthy 6-year-old child in front of you, let's take the most extreme example. They've had and recovered from Omicron. What evidence does somebody have to say that by vaccinating them with 2 doses or even 3 doses, they further reduce the risk of hospitalization or death? I think the answer to that question as of right now is I'm not aware of any such study that would even comment on such a case. Now let's say they're 6 years old and they haven't had prior infection. What is the strongest evidence that 2 doses reduce the severe disease or hospitalization or death? And I think it's likely to be this paper and paper similar, and I think they suffer from the structural bias. So this is the Overcoming COVID-19 Investigators paper. The solution, of course, is mega randomized control trials. They're not infeasible or impractical. That Pfizer has 100 billion reasons they could have run it. Those are my thoughts on this issue. I think it is going to be a truly important regulatory policy question if we give a third dose into the kids in this age group, the absolute, not the absolute, the near absolute lowest risk, because the absolute is actually a few years younger, the near absolute lowest risk age group under the auspices of emergency use authorization without clinical trial data measuring clinical benefit, only measuring antibody titers. And I think this is going to be a very important and long-standing regulatory question. I'm happy to weigh in on it in the heat of the moment. Over the next 25 years, I think a lot of regulatory scientists are going to look back and say, what evidence did you have and when did you have it? And I think it's going to be a very important question, so we want to pin this down. So if you've seen a study that you think is a very important study in this space, and I've seen another VisionNet study I'm going to cover in a future video, if you've seen such a study, send it to me. I'd love to review it. And I think those are my thoughts. This is what you get on this channel. It's a mix of critical appraisal and health policy commentary, and that's the space I inhabit. That's what my research is. So if you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Until next time.